Older couples who once would have stayed in unhappy, empty shell marriages are increasingly deciding not to spend their remaining healthy decades that way. A new study confirms what your gut already suspected. Your brain was built to track a local threat, not a war, a financial shock, and a climate disaster before lunch. And Zillow finds a record number of American cities now have entry-level starter homes that cost $1 million or more. Every day, the news cycle produces roughly 1,000 stories. About 6 of them are about politics. I went looking for the rest. This is News SideQuest. The New York Times ran a piece this week on something demographers have been tracking for years under the name Gray Divorce, and it connects directly to the marriage study we covered earlier this month. The term empty shell marriage describes exactly what it sounds like, a long-term partnership where the structure remains, the house, the routines, sometimes even genuine affection, but the emotional connection is quietly drained out. For decades, people in these marriages tended to stay. Divorce carried more stigma, women had less financial independence, and the cultural assumption was that you simply endured a marriage that had stopped working. The calculation has shifted. The U.S. Census Bureau found that the divorce rate for Americans over 50 doubled between 1990 and 2010, and for those over 65 specifically, it has roughly tripled since 1990. One psychologist who studies this trend explained the mechanism. As life expectancy increases, the math on staying changes. If you're 60 and might reasonably expect another 25 to 30 healthy years, the prospect of spending all of them in a marriage that's emotionally dead looks very different than it did when life expectancy ended the conversation a lot sooner. Women's growing financial independence removed one of the major practical barriers that used to keep people stuck, and society has placed increasingly higher expectations on marriage quality overall. Couples are less willing to settle for "we coexist" as a definition of marital success. One family therapist offered a phrase that several gray divorcees in the reporting echoed almost word for word. Quote, "Many couples live separate lives under the same roof, often even having separate bedrooms. Eventually the question changes from why are we staying to what are we missing?" I think this is largely a function of people just living longer and staying healthier later into life. It's less a story about marriage getting worse and more a story about the time horizon changing the math on what's worth tolerating. I'd also like to point out that the article in question here from the New York Times only interviewed one side of each relationship that they profiled. That's worth keeping in mind. Every gray divorce story in the media is, almost by definition, told from the perspective of the partner who initiated it or who's comfortable talking to a reporter. The other half of these conversations went untold. Have you or someone close to you made a major life change later in life that genuinely surprised people who'd known you for a long time?
Marriage. Marriage is what brings us together today.
A developmental psychologist writing for The Conversation, picked up widely this week, makes an argument grounded in basic cognitive science. Human brains evolved to track local, immediate, personally relevant threats, a neighboring tribe, a drought, the illness of a child you actually knew. For most of human history, information about distant events barely arrived at all, and when it did, it was usually irrelevant to your actual survival. You just weren't wired to consume all of the bad news happening in the world at any given moment. That neurological system hasn't changed. What's changed is the size of the world it's being asked to scan. In 2026, the same brain that evolved to notice a rustle in the grass is being asked to absorb a war in one region, a financial shock in another, a climate disaster in a third, and violent crime in a fourth, all before lunch. Every single day, indefinitely, with no evolutionary off switch. Researchers have given this a clinical name: problematic news consumption, or PNC, a pattern of engagement with news that produces preoccupation, dysregulation, and a disruption to daily functioning. A 2022 study found 17% of American adults qualify as having severe levels of it. Among that group, 61% reported feeling unwell quite a bit or very much, compared to just 6% of people without it. And here's what makes this whole thing self-reinforcing. A study published in Nature Human Behavior analyzed more than 100,000 real news headlines viewed nearly 6 million times and found that each additional negative word in a headline increased click-through rates, while positive words had the opposite effect. The negativity bias isn't a flaw in any one person's character. It's a deeply rooted survival mechanism that the entire media ecosystem has learned to exploit, intentionally or not, because it works on all of us. You're not broken if 24-hour negative news leaves you a little bit depleted. Your brain is doing precisely what it was built to do in an environment it was never actually built for. So what do you do to keep from being completely overwhelmed? I write a newsletter with goofy and occasionally thought-provoking news stories.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've been to Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and I can say without hyperbole that this is a million times worse than all of them put together.
Zillow released a housing analysis this week that puts the clearest single number yet on a thread we've pulled at all year. The Convent story, the Nantucket free house, the Brookings affordability report. A record 242 American cities now have starter homes, defined as a home in the lowest third of values in a given market, priced at $1 million or more. That's nearly triple the 80 cities that met that bar before the pandemic, and it's up from 226 cities just 1 year ago. The trend keeps accelerating, not slowing down. The geography is shifting too. California still leads with 105 cities, but New York and New Jersey are now the fastest growing states on the list. New York went from 12 cities with $1 million starter homes before the pandemic to 41 today. New Jersey went from a single city to 26. The New York metro area, including parts of New Jersey and Pennsylvania, now lead all metro areas with 63 cities where the entry-level home costs 7 figures. Here's the number that puts the gap in real terms. At current mortgage rates around 6.6%, qualifying for a $1 million home typically requires an annual household income of at least $200,000, well above what most first-time homebuyers actually earn. The nationwide typical starter home, by contrast, still costs just under $199,000. That's a 5-fold gap between the median American entry-level home and what's become normal in 242 specific cities, many of them not even in traditional luxury coastal markets anymore. Texas, Wyoming, and Illinois have all joined the list in recent years. Zillow's own economist points out these million-dollar starter homes are still the exception nationally, not the rule, and some affordability pressure actually eased slightly in parts of the country where new construction has actually kept pace with demand. The problem is concentrated specifically where housing supply is chronically lagged, overwhelmingly the Northeast and California, rather than being uniform everywhere. In the newsletter, I actually had a story of a woman who voluntarily lives in her car, choosing van life over continuing to pay rent. That's not an isolated, eccentric choice. It's a rational response for some people to a housing market where the traditional starter rung of the ladder has, in nearly 250 cities, simply been removed. What would a starter home even need to look like for you to feel like home ownership was realistic again?
I live in a van down by the river.
The Titanic series wrapped on SideQuest with the finale covering the aftermath and the changes to maritime law that came out of it. If you followed the whole arc, thank you. If you haven't started yet, it's all there now. Free condensed version for everyone, full extended cut for paid subscribers. Find SideQuest wherever you get your podcasts and at newsidequest.com.
I'll never let go. I promise.
An 87-year-old man in Pennsylvania turned down a $1.6 million lump sum scratch-off payday in favor of $10,000 a month for life instead. This is actually probably the right choice for him personally. The lump sum, run through a standard 5% withdrawal rule, would have paid out roughly $6,700 a month. Not bad, but meaningfully less than the $10,000 annuity option. The trade-off is that the lump sum belongs to his estate forever, while the monthly payments stop when he dies. For an 87-year-old prioritizing income over legacy, he made the math work in his favor. If I were a child or a niece, I might be a little upset though.
It was my understanding that there would be no math.
A Gold Coast magician named Daniel Hidden has gone missing, with police describing themselves as seriously concerned after his car and caravan were found abandoned. You think this was a magic trick gone wrong or gone right? I also want to note that Hidden is an unfortunate surname for a man who has currently achieved exactly that.
That makes sense.
An American official reportedly cited the importance of all-you-can-eat shrimp at Red Lobster as part of a justification for a potential invasion of Greenland. Shrimp access is important, but it probably shouldn't be the basis for invading an ally's territory. I want to add that I have genuinely never typed a sentence like that one before in my entire life.
Did these sound like the actions of a man who had all he could eat?
No, not at all. That could have been me.
Hundreds of England fans were kicked out of a Dallas bar after reportedly drinking 5,000 beers ahead of a World Cup match, apparently determined not to be outdone by the Scottish fans who drained Boston dry earlier this month. National honor is clearly at stake. The World Cup is functioning as an unofficial international drinking competition, with soccer matches scheduled in between.
Have you been drinking?
I'm not drunk.
That's it for News Side Quest. 3 questions out there for you to consider. Whether you or someone close to you has made a major life change that surprised everybody. What you actually do to keep from being overwhelmed by the news, and what a starter home would need to look like for home ownership to feel realistic to you. Email me at newssidequest@gmail.com or hit me up in the Substack comments. See you tomorrow.